Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this particular episode, I am going to be asking the question, how do you feel towards yourself? I believe that how you feel towards yourself drives your communication style. And I'm going to start anecdotally with an experience that I've had. And when I would date, one of the things that I obviously wanted to do was enjoy this person, have fun, and quite often I would go way out of my way in order to make the other person feel special. I spent loads of money and sometimes would travel great distances in order to make this happen. Well, after a period of time, the relationship really seemed to hinge on simply whatever it was that I did in terms of either spending the money to be with this person. And it was always something on that level. Well, I didn't feel comfortable about just say, hey, can we just kind of sit back and chill, just kind of hang out or something like that. My work, what I do outside of the podcast is fairly physical, it's fairly exhausting. And I was always happy to be able to just sit back. But when you're going to go out on a date with somebody, that's not what you're going out on a date for. You're going out on a date to have fun. Aside from the physical exhaustion, I still wanted to be able to spend time with the person, but not always spend money. But I felt very uncomfortable about saying, hey, it seems like the only thing we do is go out, I spend money on you, and that's our date. Well, now this is my own thing, and again, I'm opening this up anecdotally because having not felt or giving myself the permission to really have this deeper conversation about, what else can we do other than spend money on this thing? And I was the one who was footing all the expense, by the way. It was probably a chauvinistic thing to do, to expect to always spend the money and then go out on a date and do these fun things. Now, I did enjoy myself. Okay, so I wasn't resisting that part, but it was just becoming expensive, and I had other things that I had to live for as well. What followed is I wound up calling this person less and less, and over the long-term stretch, it seemed like I was less interested. Well, what had happened is I started feeling bad about myself, about not having really communicated what my real needs were, and needing to take some time, but I didn't want to end the relationship per se. I just wanted to be able to do things other than have to spend a trunkload of cash every time we went out. And, I can't necessarily blame her for it because, what woman would want to resist a guy who wants to go out and spend and have fun? Well, it sort of became this clash of personality styles. She, it turns out, was somebody who likes to go out all the time. And while I enjoyed the thought of meeting somebody like that, being able to keep up with that lifestyle because I'm a homeowner and I have responsibilities at home and repairs and this, that, and the other, I tend to like that aspect of it. Well, she didn't have that. It just became something that was not working. And ultimately the relationship, went its separate ways. But I had to think about how I felt towards myself and not wanting to raise the question, but also what my expectations were. It took a while. I had to really, really get down to the nuts and bolts and process this and ask some very painful questions. One of which is I thought I knew myself better than to have expectations and to verbalize them, which I obviously didn't do in this case because I think underneath it I felt if I had said anything at all, it would have been the end of this relationship. Well, that should have been an indicator. And this is something for those of you who are listening going forward, that if you feel that speaking your piece is going to somehow damage the relationship irreparably, then that's not a relationship for you to be in. So that's part of my advice going forward. And the other thing is, I should have said something because it would have given this person an opportunity to show up, and possibly it may have gone on to have been a better relationship, but I didn't give it that chance. So why I didn't say anything, that had more to do with my fear of actually losing the relationship, and obviously it ended anyway. I kind of allowed myself to get caught up in this trap, and I think a lot of us do it. I wanted her to read my mind, because I didn't want to say the things that would have just busted open the communication. Because the thing that I had a fear of was that when somebody walks off and wants to think about it, I fear that they're going to come back with a no. They're going to find some way to not give me what I want. And maybe that's a typical guy response. I still haven't figured that part out. But the minute somebody has to think about it, I'm thinking, okay, they're either going to try to figure out how to not give me what I want, or they want to keep negotiating. And, I think I'm a pretty good negotiator. I mean, that's my thought. But when I think somebody's going to counter offer to me, I get worried that I'm going to have to do more than I'm already doing. And I'm going to get talked into it because it's like I want it more than they do. And this is a pretty scary situation for me. And that's been something that has plagued me in relationships, for as far back as I can remember. And that's the kind of thing that I've had to work on, is understanding what I want ahead of time. And I've never been a really good planner in that regard. I just kind of go along for the ride and then figure out in that moment, yeah or nay. And I think that's good in a lot of ways because I'm pretty free, pretty open, and like to do things. But in the instance, there are things that I just absolutely say no to. And for those, and I'm not a real risky kind of guy. I mean, I don't go jumping off of bridges with bungee cords tied to my ankles. And some people are good in that kind of spontaneity. Me, I was kind of the guy that would, go take in a movie at the last minute and see how much time I had before I'd get tired, and maybe take a drive or something like that. A lot of those kinds of things. How do you feel about yourself? Let me kind of move more towards that thing. When you've thought about these kinds of questions ahead of time, then you already know what your answers are going to be, and you've sized up what kinds of experiences that you've had, what you want to have going forth. And I think that's got to be a pretty confidence building on the inside. I think you should feel good about yourself when you know those kinds of answers, because you can probably have a conversation about this kind of stuff without being overly dramatic. Because when you're trying to figure these things out and be in the moment and discuss it with someone else, it's probably one of those things where these things can become pretty dramatic, pretty emotional, not in a bad way, but very expressive. And it's a work in progress. But when you already know these answers, you could seem pretty confident. You relate to yourself fairly well. You can say yes or no to it. And by being that sure, that appearing to be that confident about who you are in life, that's very powerful. That's very attractive. And I know people are attracted to that. Men or women, who's ever listening to that, to that explanation, know that that's a very powerful, very confident thing to project, and people are attracted to that. That has that sort of charismatic quality to it. And then those who are observing it can decide if they like it or not. It sort of makes life easier. But we are all also here to learn and grow and going forward from that. And that's the thing that I've had to take from this, is how to drill it down, so to speak, who I am in those instances. And being a person like myself who's spontaneous, sometimes it's really hard to want to say no to stuff ahead of time, because you think, well, you've had this experience before, maybe it'll be different this time around. And I've pretty much been open to things like that. Say you want to go roller skating. I might not have had a good experience before, but I'll try it again to see if that's something I want to do. And if it doesn't work the third or fourth time, then I might say, no. But I'm also kind of one of those personalities that's not a quitter. So I keep trying things and keep filling my calendar with things until I stop saying, I don't say no to anything. And boy, does that really kind of load you up with a lot of stuff to do that you can't complete. So that's the other part, where in my own experience, I would overcommit to things. And then I'd feel bad because I let someone down. So I have had to learn how to be more and more of a planner. It's not natural to me to do that because my style of living and experiencing life is more spontaneous. So I'm just working on that in life. But again, I ask the question, how do you feel towards yourself? And if you see yourself in any of these descriptions that I've talked about, give rise to the idea of thinking back on the experiences that you've had in life and how other people have experienced you, how you've experienced other people, how you problem solved. And I think thinking ahead, projecting ahead as to what you want and being able to speak to that. I talk a lot about, communicating what your needs are. This hopefully will help you begin to think about what some of those things are. And to those of you who are very good at that, I applaud you because I am not necessarily one of those kinds of guys, but I think I'm a pretty fun guy to have around. But it's just that I'm not necessarily one of those that's very good at planning. And having relearned that lesson over and over in life, I have taken to where I've slowed things down and have certainly stopped investing my time and effort into things that don't give me a positive return back. That's one of those things that I've learned. And, I asked myself, okay, where did I become, or at what point in time in my life did I become one of these just kind of friendly, fun, happy-go-lucky guys? And I have to credit my parents for that because my life as a kid growing up was pretty nice. And, my mother was able to be very loving towards me and showed me the good side of people. So I've tried to embrace pretty much most of anything that came on. But what happened? I grew up to be somebody that took on a lot more things and didn't say no to a lot of stuff when overcommitted and then would let people down and had to deal with the fallout of that. And for the most part, when that part happened, I didn't feel very good about myself. And you can imagine if you're a guy who's dating a woman and you're not able to, say, get somewhere on time or seem like you can commit to something ahead of time, it doesn't lend well to seeming like you're that you will commit. In fact, I think what's they say, commitment phobic, and I don't think any guy likes the sound of that because it makes it seem like you're not worth having. So that's a lot of work to change that perception with someone. Sometimes you wind up ending that relationship and you go on to the next person, but in that in-between space, you do the woodshedding, you learn about yourself, you grow, you evolve, and then you get on to the next relationship. Because, see, it also changes your perspective about yourself, but then it changes who you might become attracted to because you will ask better questions. And one of the things that I have found out in life is when you ask better questions of other people, it tends to weed out the people who aren't compatible with you. Interesting people will ask you, or that interested people will ask you interesting and interested questions in return. So it becomes this really good, you're sort of interviewing each other and learning about your compatibilities. And that's a very important thing to do with somebody you're interested in spending your time with, is asking those questions. And when you don't have experience at it, and then we tend to blow past all of that and just limp along. And how long can you do that? Well, some people do that an awful long time and go on with life. But when you're asking the interesting questions, you begin to learn if you're compatible with that person. And I say bring your experience with you, because things have happened to you in life and there's no sense in ignoring it. Who you are is who you are. And I think that's very attractive when you bring your authentic self to these conversations. It really shows that you're somebody who can, I think it's a very powerful thing to be able to learn in a relationship with someone about them, whether it's their spirituality, if they're Buddhist or Christian or Catholic or a Muslim, whatever the relation, some of those nuts and bolts to a person's character, to their personality. I think that's attractive. That's what helps build a relationship foundation. And eventually it will come to that. Eventually you will have the upsets in the relationship, a breakdown of communication or so. But if you have a fairly good foundation, then you at least have something to start from, to open a conversation or to reconnect or to rekindle, one of those things that works, so that you can keep the relationship and going forward. Asking the question, how do you feel towards yourself? Well, at this moment, I'm going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. You're listening to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I'm your host, John Johnson. And in this segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about a breakup. Invariably, when you have your experiences with people, there are times when things work really well and things are skating along, and there are times when they aren't. And there is the transition that happens, and I'm talking about a breakup. Sometimes you can sense things are changing, and you might feel powerless to do anything about that. And it's, well, what is a breakup like? If you haven't experienced that, and there are a lot of people out there who are, those are young love, and they don't really necessarily know what a breakup is. Well, it's when two people have a relationship, or at least feel like they have one, and one or both decides to go a different direction. And it's what happens to you and those transitional moments, and then when you finally have that flush that comes over you, that wow, this relationship has ended. And there are lots of reasons why relationships could end. It could be an argument. It could be that you live too far apart to see each other on some sort of continual basis. And and there's the very tragic one is when somebody dies and you no longer have them in your life in that way. But I'm going to talk more or less about the relationships that have more of a romantic component to it, and what to expect, and how to move on from that. And I've talked about it in various ways in other podcasts, but I'm going to talk about this specifically. And here's what happens when you're in a relationship with someone and you're feeling that tension that happens when you have some unresolved issues, and you begin to worry that this thing is just going the wrong direction, or it's going a direction that both of you aren't going the same direction. That obviously creates some anxiety inside. It can be difficult to sleep. It can be difficult to eat, hard to concentrate. And your conversations, even with other people, could take on that sort of negative quality. I mean, you're not even speaking about the things that you like anymore. Things tend to have a sense of doom and gloom, the clouds all around. And a lot of this is, obviously related to somebody who's important to you, and the relationship is possibly going to end. And that obviously creates anxiety in your communications with even this person that you may be having a difficulty with. It's hard to be happy. And if you are, you're maybe faking it. And, we as human beings, we read through stuff like that. That's just window dressing, and we're not able to get down to the heart of the matter. If there is something that's creating an obstacle to the closeness, that's a difference of opinion, a point of view, something that happened. And if you can talk about it, you can get your feelings out there. There may be a possibility that you're able to salvage something. But when you can't, then you're obviously in the position of having to deal with there's going to be a real change in life. And that is a very traumatic experience for a lot of us. I've certainly had my breakups, and they've never been happy occasions. I've on a few have tried to be the grown up or the bigger person in experiencing it, but there was certainly a lot of sadness. And what came with that is, and I'll be real specific here. I've, would receive, the communication that, hey, I've thought about this relationship and it's not something I want to continue with. When you have tried your hardest, your darndest to make this relationship work, because it takes two people to make a relationship, it takes one to break it. That's just the way it is. Then you wind up thinking about, okay, how much time am I going to spend trying to change someone else's mind? I'm here to suggest that this is the point where you're not there to change somebody else's mind. You're basically going to have to let it be, and you're going to have to set with it. And this is about taking care of yourself. This is about recognizing that, you may go through a lot of emotional pain. It could be tears. You could wind up dealing with separating of personal effects. There's the yours stuff, there's the their stuff, and there's the things that you had together. Those kinds of things happen. Things that would play out day to day that you shared with each other, that's going to change. And a lot of things like that. The thought of something like that obviously can be beyond the scope of thinking for some people, because if you've never really been through a breakup, then I'm telling you, that's part of the transition. And for some people, a breakup is actually a good change. If you've been around toxic people, you are saving yourself further heartache or adding extra baggage or negative experiences to your life. And that's a good thing for you. This is sometimes for some people, breakups are happy occasions because they can finally get on with their life. For those individuals in which this sort of transition becomes something that's very heavy, it's a time where you really have to know yourself, learn how to take care of yourself. And you can find your friends. Hopefully you have friends that you can spend time with that can help console you through the process. And if you don't, then it obviously is a time that you're going to be by yourself, on your own. And when I say by yourself, I mean that you're not going to be introducing necessarily new partners into your life, because this is not a good time to be doing something like that, because you really have to get to that place where you're understanding what's happening to you, answer some questions, some fundamental questions about the relationship, why it ended, how you are around people, and what you need for yourself going forward. Because having those answers means that what you just experienced wasn't for nothing, because you don't want to continue to repeat these types of painful things, because when you continually put your life on that treadmill of just going through breakup after breakup after breakup, it destroys you. It hurts you. And you want to be able to answer the questions as to what you're doing wrong. If you're doing something wrong, you want to be able to answer those questions so that you can move forward in life, so that you can gift yourself with the joy that life is there for you. One other thing that I might mention too, and this is something that has been proven scientifically, that when you continue to take on or do those toxic things, it affects you physically as well as emotionally. Why put yourself through that? I say health is wealth. I'm going to say that again. Health is wealth. If you're healthy, that is as good as gold, because that is then a quality of life issue. And being emotionally bankrupt or emotionally destroyed and staying in that place for the length of time that can happen, it's worth examining your life and trying to fix that about yourself, trying to repair yourself rather than jumping into a new relationship. And breakups give you the opportunity to do this sort of work. And it's a very important work for yourself. I think a therapist is a good person to be able to sit down and talk with. And here's the reason why. A therapist will listen to your story and try to help point out things, looking at the patterns of your life and where you have been derailed, either in your intentions to be in relationship with someone, or or with yourself. And important in all of this is first learning to take care of yourself before you can take care of someone else. I know we tend to get that backwards. We tend to want to take care of other people and build from there. I have learned myself the hard way that you have to learn to take care of yourself and then take care of other people. Because when you do it that way, you can be much more centered and you use your life's experience and influence and can have a much more positive outcome because you understand your limitations. And that's a very important thing to know about yourself, what your limitations are. For many people, this discussion may be way outside of their comfort zone. And it begs the question that if this is way outside of your comfort zone, then it's probably something you need to evaluate at your own time and space when you're in your own personal space and think about who you are, what you want. And I'm talking about the breakup situation because it happens. And it happens for all manner of reasons, a number of reasons which you don't have control over. And if it happens to be something that you have a very strong influence, meaning if you have hurt somebody emotionally or and they no longer want to be with you, then you have to look at why you did what you did and come to grips with the fact that you're responsible. And taking responsibility for your actions in your life goes a long way to helping you have a better life. And I realize this all sounds more philosophical, but I think it's an important point because the end result is you do have control over what happens to you in those experiences. So admittedly, they are painful. It's not a place that I would like to be for very long, and I definitely wouldn't want you to experience that for very long, but it does happen. And you will survive it to live another day. I'm John Johnson. This is Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I want to thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.